The meeting is live, Chairman.
Thank you, Stephen. Good afternoon. I'm Councillor Iskander Jeffries, the Chairman for the Joint Public Protection Committee, and I would like to welcome you all to the meeting. Before we start, I'd like to explain, for the benefit of the members of the public who may be watching, that today's meeting is being held both over Zoom and with councillors present in the council chamber at West Berkshire Council. The meeting is being live streamed on YouTube, so members of the public are able to follow proceedings. The other committee members in attendance are Councillor Nick Allen from Bracknell Forest Council and Councillor Justin Pemberton from West Berkshire Council. Councillor Howard Wollaston and Jeremy Cotton are joining us remotely via Zoom. Members are being supported by a number of officers from the two partner authorities, including from the Public Protection Partnership. Officers are in attendance either in person or remotely. For any votes, members of the committee in the council chamber are the only ones who can take part in the formal decision. They will be asked to vote by raising their physical hand. Please can I ask everyone present in the meeting area to make sure they switch on their microphones when invited to speak directly into them and to switch them on and off when finished speaking. Thank you. Item number 1, apologies.
Yes, Chairman, we had an apology from Councillor Sharice Welch.
Thank you, Clerk. Item number 2, I would like to ask the Clerk if there are any declarations of interest.
None advised in advance, Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Item number 3, public protection priorities 2024 to 2027. And I would like to ask Sean Murphy to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chairman. So members will recall that in June we came before this committee with the draft strategic assessment. That set out effectively a range of priority areas for the service, but also all of the work that was expected within the service for business as usual. It was also explained at that committee that there were a number of pressures building, particularly in areas around housing and food, in terms of resource, and that we would need to do some degree of prioritisation with the service. Officers were tasked to go away and talk to members. We had 2 very useful sessions in Bracknell and in West Berkshire. And what we have now basically in the report today is a summary of the outcome of that. So having spoken to members, I think that where we got to was that there was a genuine agreement across the authorities and within the authorities that basically the approach that we needed to take needed to be a calculated approach around risk. So in the report, I won't go into the detail, but it talks about the priority methodology that we use, a model called Morale, which is around the management of risk in law enforcement. And we also took into account basically the priorities that were brought forward by the councils with respect to their own residents. So where we ended up, just very, very quickly, is that we identified a number of priority areas. Those are set out at 5.10. They include private sector housing, food safety and standards, protecting consumers from fair trading and fraud, a whole range of community matters around ASB, domestic and commercial nuisance, licensing, dog fouling, pests. Work around the protection of young people and communities that sits alongside that. So that would include things like the sale of alcohol, age-restricted sales, fireworks, knives, vapes, and then for Bracknell Forest, where we do this work solely at the moment, basically a priority around environmental crime in the form of fly tipping. Beyond that, basically the steer that we got was if we could focus on those areas that I've discussed that effectively we would need to manage the rest of the service using the model I've talked about, which looks at harm, the likelihood of that harm and frequency, and our capacity and capability to deliver. So I'll stop there. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Sean. I'd like to open it up to any questions in the room first, and then we'll go online.
Said I wasn't going to ask a question today, but I'm just curious. You obviously talk about the approach to risk and the morale model, which makes perfect sense to me. The issue of dog fouling, I think, is one that exercises a lot of people. The individual impact is low, but it's prevalent, and there's probably an argument to say that many councils have struggled to really get a grip on it. Do you think that our current approach is satisfactory? Do you think there's more that we could do to combat that? And if so, what do you think we could do?
So you're absolutely right, and this is one of the challenges of using any model where basically you've got high frequency and relatively low risk. I'm not saying dog fouling does present a risk from disease and everything else. I mean, we do get an awful lot of inquiries about it. We have a reporting system for dog fouling incidents, and we do seek to basically carry out some awareness and enforcement work with respect to the issue, and we do seek to basically highlight problem areas and target problem areas, because we do get reports, and quite often you'll find it's an area, and it may be a particular dog owner that's causing a particular problem in an area. So we do look to pick up on things like that. So the other issue is things like overflowing dog bins, and we are doing some work to try and encourage those with responsibility for emptying those as well, that basically that needs to be done. And other behaviours with people leaving dog waste basically in plastic bags and things like that, or leaving them around things like bins and things like that when they're full. So there is an awful lot of engagement to deal with. There is an awful lot of engagement there, and we would hope basically to appeal to people, but ultimately there are enforcement powers, but at the moment there's very much a lot of focus around engagement.
Thank you, Sean. Any other questions? Okay, so, oh, yes.
Just to say that no questions today. My previous questions and answers stand from the last meeting. Thank you.
Noted. So I will propose to move the recommendations and would seek a seconder.
Happy to second, Chair.
Thank you, sir. And then can I ask the clerk to read out the recommendations?
Certainly, Chairman. Okay. So the recommendations for consideration are firstly to note the outcome of the priority setting discussions with the partner councils, resolve that the management of risk in law enforcement, the morale methodology forms the basis of operational risk, and resolves that those matters identified as priority areas for the councils listed in paragraph 5.10 be weighted accordingly in risk and priority calculations. Can members vote, members in the room vote in favour of those recommendations? Thank you. Carried.
Thank you, sir. Moving on to item number 4, revenue budget 2025 to 2026, including proposed fees and changes schedule. Can I ask Sean Murphy to introduce the report?
Thank you, Chairman. So this report really deals with 3 issues. In fact, the first one is the setting of the proposing of the revenue budget for 25-26. It also proposes a fee schedule for 25-26, and finally, it invites the committee to update the policy around grants, the use of grant allocations under the asset recovery incentivisation scheme. So, moving to the issues around budgets and fees and charges, just to remind the committee that under the terms of the inter-authority agreement, they have a responsibility to propose a budget. So what you're not doing today is setting a budget, you're proposing a budget, and you're saying to the councils, in effect, actually, we were to provide the service that we feel we need to provide or wish to provide. This is what we would need to do it. And it's a matter for the councils, obviously, to make an allocation as they see fit or as they see appropriate, and to set the fees and charges as they see appropriate, taking into account the recommendations. So the allocations are done on a percentage split between the two authorities. There is also a allocation for Wokingham for the bits that we share, the parts of the service that we share with Wokingham. Those are set out at 5.27, sorry. The proposals are basically the split between the main elements of the service between Wokingham and Bratton is roughly 60-40, as you can see there. There is the Wokingham contribution for those parts that we share with Wokingham, so training standards, case management, etc., is in the column as well. And you can see the overall proposed net revenue budget for the service for next year. So that is the proposal on budget. Moving on to fees, as you know, these are calculated based on an hourly rate. At this stage in the year, there are still obviously some uncertainties around what, for example, inflation would be next year. But there are some factors that we've built into the proposal around increase, which obviously include an estimated cost of living increase in salaries and things like that. And at the moment, what we're proposing basically is 3%. So that would include the overall salary uplift. In most of the service budget is salary, and any associated on costs, NI, pension, things around that, and obviously some other costs that we would have. So obviously within the licensing world, we buy things that are, plates and all of those other kind of things that we buy, basically badges and things like that. So that's what's proposed. So we're talking 3%. And to give you an example of what that would mean, so for example, on a taxi vehicle, that would be an increase of £8, I believe, something of that order. Yeah. So that's the kind of order that we're looking at, basically, in a year. Obviously, this only applies to discretionary fees. The other thing that is really important to say is that obviously we're still suffering from, the authorities are still suffering from the failure to have reviewed the statutory fees, which have not been reviewed for many, many years, and are now many tens of percentage behind where they would have been had they just kept in line with inflation. And then finally, appended to this, so normally what happens is back in 2017, the committee approved a policy of how any assets would be used that came into the asset recovery incentivisation scheme under the Proceeds of Crime Act. It is really important to say that these are not part of the revenue budget of the service. And there's all sorts of really important legal reasons why that's important that we state that. And so what you've got is a document there basically that sets out how it would be used in terms of the delivery of things. So in the past, I'll give you examples of the kind of things that it's been used for. So things like victim support. It's been used for things like buying, call blockers. It's been used for other work around proceeds of crime and things like that. So that's all set out in that document. What the committee is being invited to do today is to approve the request for contribution set out at 5.27 to recommend for Wokingham to recommend to partner councils a contribution set out at 5.27. Clearly, there can be a difference between what the authorities can afford and the request, and those debates will go on after this meeting. We'll report back in December. Approve the proposed basis for the fee increases and approve the revised asset recovery incentivisation scheme policy. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Sean. I'll first just like to go on record and say well done to the officers and the team behind this. We are suffering pressures, as we know from previous budget into this budget, and again projected again for next year. And I have been privy to seeing the work that's been done on this, and it's commendable to keep such an important service afloat, especially as it's there to protect the public. In terms of the licensing fee increase, I'd just like to go on record and say that I fully support it, especially as, yes, it is a 3% increase. However, we haven't increased our pricing in a very long time. And taking into consideration inflation as well, I don't even think that 3% touches on it over the course of time that we've had this. I think, if I'm correct, it goes back to.
Sorry, Chair, if I may, just to clarify that the 3% is on the proposed discretionary fees set by the authority. The statutory fees, I think, and particularly the ones for the Licensing Act 2003 go back to 2011. So it is 13 years since those were increased, and there is a very useful calculator on the Bank of England website where you can type in a price in 2011 and it'll tell you what it should have been now, and I can tell you the gap is very big.
Yes, thank you for clarifying. And yes, it goes back to 2011. It's a very, very long time. I implore anyone who's also watching to take you up on using the Bank of England calculator, because we tend to forget what's that inflation looks like over 10 plus years. So I will stop there, and I will ask my fellow Vice Chair if there's anything he'd like to add or any questions.
Just on the issue of the statutory fees, Chair, I would echo everything that you've just said in terms of how far behind they've now gotten. And this isn't something that started in 2011. If you use the calculator, which the Bank of England calculator that Sean has referred to, the real terms increase is more like 71, 72% in terms of how much higher those statutory fees should be. So I think you're right, Chair, to allude to the fact that the 3% increase doesn't touch the sides. As Sean has correctly pointed out, that refers to the discretionary fees, but it's certainly something that we're taking very seriously here at West Berkshire Council. In fact, the Vice Chair of this committee, and so I beg your pardon, the Chair of the Licensing Committee, who is joining us online at the moment, Councillor Cottam, has taken steps to bring this as a motion to Council. So that is something that will be debated by Council later this year. Obviously, there's only so much that we can do, but where we are able to lobby ministers to review this, we will use whatever powers we have, however limited they may be. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, sir. Well said. No other questions?
I mean, just to say on that point, I mean, if you take, for example, obviously planning fees were reviewed very recently. If we had a similar increase in the licensing fees, I mean, that would be, you know, perhaps somewhere between sort of 80 and £100,000. That's how far out we are at the moment.
And that will definitely help fill the hole that we're trying to fill at the moment. And so I suppose, obviously, this is for this discussion, but I'd like to probably explore options, I suppose, where we can increase fees going forward. Obviously, we can't go from 0 to 80, 70%, but I think we also need to keep up with the times. And I think, yes, those are wider discussions we shall have within both authorities. Moving forward, I would like to propose the recommendations, and can I seek a seconder, please?
Yeah, happy to second, Chair.
Thank you, sir. I will revert to the clerk to read out the recommendations.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, so recommendations before members to consider the draft revenue budget, including the fees and charges as set out. It's asked to recommend to partner councils that the contributions that are in column 3 of the table at 5.27 form the basis of the 25-26 net revenue budget contributions. Further, to note the pressures that are set out in columns 4 and 5 in that same table at 5.27. to approve the fees and charges set out in Appendix A, approve the contribution request from Woking Borough Council to be as set out in paragraph 5.27, and to approve the revised asset recovery incentivisation scheme, and note that that funding does not form part of the revenue budget. Those funds are allocated in accordance with the policy. Those are the recommendations. Can I ask members to vote in favour of those? Thank you. That's carried.
Thank you, sir. Moving on to item number 5, the nuisance policy 2024 to 2027. And if I could invite Moira Fraser to introduce the report, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Members will recall that we brought the draft nuisance policy to the June JPPC meeting, where it was agreed that we would go out to consultation, which we did. And we were very pleased to receive 69 responses to that consultation. Detailed responses to that consultation and the comments that we received are set out in Appendix C to the report. As a result of the consultation, we have made some changes to the proposed policy. Most notably, we have added additional wording to Section 3 to clarify what the PPP can and cannot do in response to noise complaints. We have clarified what a private matter is in Appendix 2, which is in essence the glossary, and a reference to anonymous complaints has been added to Section 5 of the report as well. Members are being asked if they wish to make any additional changes to the policy and for it to be adopted and published. We are also seeking authority to be delegated to the service lead for the Public Protection Partnership, that's Sean, in consultation with the chairman and the vice chairman of this committee to make any further minor amendments to the policy once it's been adopted. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Moira. Yeah, I'd like, it was a great piece of work that was put together. The response from the public was also well received. It was interesting to read through the report and read some of the comments that came back. And I'd also like to go on record that everybody that did put something in were responded to officially, which was also a big piece of work that went on in the background. I fully endorse this document. I have no further questions to ask of it because I'd like to also say that it was a thorough piece of work. So thank you to you and the team. And I fully endorse this. So I will stop there and ask my fellow vice chair if he has any questions on the nuisance policy.
No questions, Chair. Just to echo your comments and the thanks to the officers on how thorough the piece of work was, not just in terms of drafting the report, but dealing with the inquiries that came in off the back of the consultation. As I know Moira will echo, the responses that we got far surpassed what we were originally expecting, and I think that's a reflection of how some of the issues contained within the report, specifically around antisocial behaviour and nuisance, can be a blight. So well done to officers. I've got no questions, I've got no comments, no amendments I wish to make, and I'll leave it there, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. No furthers. Okay, I will like to propose, and can I get a seconder?
Happy to second, Chair.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to revert over to the clerk to read out the recommendations.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, so members are asked to consider the responses received during the consultation. Those are set out in Appendix B, and the officers' comments on those responses, which are in Appendix C. The committee is asked to approve the nuisance policy 2024 to 2027 as set out in the documents. There are no additional changes agreed at this meeting. And finally, the authority is going to be delegated to the service lead for public protection in consultation with the chairman and vice chairman of this committee to make any minor amendments to the policy once it's been adopted. Can I ask members to vote in favour of the recommendations? Thank you. Carried.
Thank you. And that brings us to the end of business. So I'd like to note all business has now been concluded, and I'd like to thank everybody for attending both online and in person. The next meeting will take place on December the 16th, 2024 at Bracknell Forest Council offices. Thank you to all for all your help and support on this.
the live stream's closed.